So listen, Bloodline is actually one of my favourite films, and I actually think it's one of the strongest we've got. I mean,
Thank you so much.
The gruesomeness is so startling. I was quite, this jaded, was really shocked. But no, seriously, I mean, you went in there completely to sort of make that sort of movie.
Yeah. I mean, I think, it's actually not that gory a film, right? I mean, there's lots more gore. I mean, going back even like early Peter Jackson, I mean, they're just like covered in gore. But I think it's about building up the tension and then this brutal surprise where there's suddenly, huge blood or something really gory and visceral. And I was really going for that. And it was also really important for me to do practical effects. And I had a really, really fantastic practical effects team who were really excited about what I kind of wanted to do. Like I went in and met they're called the Russells, Russell Effects, and it's they're a married couple, Josh and Sierra. And I went in and I was like, okay, so there's gonna be throat slashes and stuff, but I don't want to just do the thing. I want to make sure we go in like that and then pull it out. So there's blood flying at the camera and stuff. They're like, yes, we want to do that forever, but nobody ever asked us for it. So definitely there's like a little gleeful kind of, horror geek fanboy in me that wanted to do it, but also I think it actually does give a little bit of a shock for a film that's not really jump scares.
No, I mean, and it's a Blumhouse production, isn't it? I mean, how did you find that whole operation? Did it work for you? Was it a good thing to belong to as a collective?
Oh yeah, it was great. They're wonderful to work for, really, because they, first of all, they really give you creative freedom. I had to. So this project originated. There was already a script that they had that Seann was attached to, and I had been talking to them about another thing. I had done a documentary for them a couple of years ago, and they sent me that and said, "Oh, we're actually looking for a director for this." And I read it, and the basic premise was there of sort of serial killer has a baby, and hilarity ensues, right? But it was more of like a classic serial killer story, and for me, like that basic premise of serial killer has a baby allowed for we can do something really dark about family here. So Avra and I went in and rewrote it and really made it, that sort of integral part of the story.
Because the whole point about it is you have to really sympathise with him, and you do, until you suddenly realise what he's actually up to. But he never loses that sympathy. And it's a very clever piece of writing that you never think, oh my God, this is horrifying, I can't stand this guy. You still want to know what's going on. I think that's one of the crucial things.
Yeah, and I think that was also very important to us that, I think we do follow him into a little bit of a shift. And honestly, when we wrote it, knowing that Seann was already attached, we really kept him in mind and knew that the audience is going to come to him with some preconceived notions, right? They're going to think of him as the goofy, charming, whatever guy. And even though his performance is very different, obviously, in this, there's a warmth that people have towards him and that he naturally has. So we wanted to use that, and then, he does sort of become more and more of a monster when the killings become a little less morally clear, right?
It's interesting how Seann William Scott actually sort of seems to be having a revival. I mean, isn't it? Because, I'd wondered what happened to him, and he turns up in this, and then he's in Lethal Weapon and all this sort of stuff. So it is quite extraordinary that he's coming back through this way. So I'm amazed that he actually was attached to this. Did he see this as something like a comeback or a change in character focus for him?
I think so. I think he definitely did, and he obviously, the success of the American Pie movies, while it was great for a lot of reasons for him, it also really pigeonholed him as Stifler. I mean, that's what everybody thought. And, he's actually a pretty brilliant actor, and what did surprise me is he's a complete horror buff. I mean, he really knows a lot of horror movies, and that was, we would be talking about other movies and other references, and he would be right there with it, so it wasn't like somebody just kind of coming in and dipping his toes just because he wanted to rebrand. He really wanted to do a dark sort of thriller horror movie.
And the photography is brilliant. I mean, you say Brian De Palma, but that was clearly a reference, wasn't it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, I'm a huge De Palma fan, and really, when I first when I first started getting really into horror and psychological thrillers, it was with De Palma. I actually did a film class in high school where we actually did De Palma first and then Hitchcock to sort of see, everything that he was obviously drawing on. But what I loved about him obviously is his incredible style, but also he builds up psychological tension and yet remains distant enough to be kind of tongue-in-cheek and to have fun with it, so that it's not this kind of earnest, constant storyline. So obviously, De Palma for sure was a huge influence.
No, I mean, and I'm right, because when I was reading up on the film, they said that you actually had a hard time keeping like a straight face, because what you were doing was so seriously hardcore that you often did just burst out laughing because it was just too much to bear.
Yeah, for sure. And honestly, I think horror is starting to get its sense of humor back. I think for a long time, after the 90s, because I think the 90s was so sort of self-reflexive and kind of campy with, the Scream movies and Final Destination and, The Faculty, all of which, I grew up with and love. But it went very dark and very serious, sort of the torture porn genre. And for me, there is an element of camp that is inherent in, because it is reality pushed much further than your reality. So I think humor is very important, and we definitely sort of wanted there to be laughs.
The documentary field you've done, like what would I have seen of yours?
Well, the most recent documentary that I directed was actually I co-directed with Emma Tammy, who directed The Wind. She's actually, we're producing partners. We have a company together. Was a film on Election Day in 2016 during the Trump, that played. It sold locally. It was on Epix and then Hulu. I think it was distributed here on Hulu, and.
Oh, so serious stuff.
Oh yeah, and then prior to that, a lot of really dark stuff. I mean, the first project I worked on was a film about a sort of reconciliation project in Sierra Leone. I did a lot of post-conflict and conflict work.
So now that's the conundrum then solved about The Wind. That's how you ended up, with that, because it's part of your production.
Yes, yeah. So Emma and I met over 10 years ago on a doc that she was producing. Then just kind of kept on bringing each other on to whatever jobs we were working on, and formed our company, Mind Hive, about 5 years ago.
That, again, is a deceptively simple story, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it is really,
It is, but of course the structure is, it's this non-linear, very complicated structure, and that was a challenge, I think, because where do you set up the reveals? How do you build the tension when you're not going through this sort of traditional timeline narrative? And then in terms of shooting it, again, it was another movie we had a very tight timeline on, even tighter budget than on Bloodline. And, all shooting out in the sort of high plains in New Mexico, and it was beautiful, but it was also, tough environment. But actually, some of the same team worked on the Andahars also worked on that movie. That's where I found them, and I was like, "Yes, you're coming with me."
Because let's face it, Western horror, Western psychological horror, is a rarity enough. Isn't it? So you must have thought, well, we are actually doing something different.
Yeah, for sure, and also having that female perspective. I think what that movie does is it takes the classic Western story and sort of flips the gender POV. The classic story is that John Wayne rides off in the sunset, leaving the women behind. But in this case, we stay with the woman alone in these brutal environments. And there was a lot of research that went into that movie about. There are a number of books that, in the last 20 years, have investigated sort of the women's experience in the Old West and the isolating. And there was a sense of sort of going mad because there's so much time alone and there's no other people. You're out. There's nobody's around for miles. So that was rooted in history.